I had always thought living in a quiet neighborhood meant peace and quiet. You know, the kind of place where kids ride their bikes safely, neighbors wave as they walk their dogs, and the most stressful thing is deciding what color to paint your mailbox. Life was simple, predictable, almost boring. That is, until my packages started disappearing. At first, I chalked it up to bad memory. Maybe I had brought them inside and forgotten. Maybe the delivery guy left them in the wrong spot. Maybe, I joked to myself, my porch had become some kind of portal to where only Amazon boxes could enter and never leave. But then it happened again, and again, week after week. Each time, the excitement of waiting for a package, the thrill of a new gadget, a snack I'd been craving, a random thing I didn't really need but wanted desperately, was stolen away, like some invisible hand had plucked it right from under my nose. It got to the point where I was suspicious of everyone. The UPS driver, too cheerful, the FedEx guy, always too precise. Even my neighbors started feeling like they had ulterior motives. And then, as if my paranoia needed confirmation, I started noticing someone lingering nearby whenever a package arrived. At first, it was subtle, just a shadow across the street, a neighbor who happened to be walking past. But the more I noticed, the more my stomach sank. There was someone always around when packages went missing. Someone who seemed way too interested in my porch. It didn't take long for me to put two and two together. Karen from the HOA. Of course, it had to be Karen. She was the kind of person who lived and breathed HOA rules. She had the perfectly manicured lawn that glistened in the morning sun, a mailbox so pristine it practically sparkled, and a suspicious knack for knowing everyone's business before they even knew it themselves. She was always around, always observing, always smiling just a little too sweetly. I tried convincing myself it was all in my head. Maybe I was just imagining it. But then the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Every time a package went missing, there she was, her heels clicking down the street, her gaze drifting to my porch, and that irritating little nod she gave when she thought I wasn't looking. That nod said, "I know something you don't," and it made my blood boil. I knew I needed proof. I couldn't just accuse her based on hunches and gut feelings. That would be embarrassing, and knowing Karen, she would turn it around to make me look like the crazy neighbor. So, I decided to set up a hidden camera on my porch. Nothing fancy, just something small and inconspicuous. Something that could capture anyone messing with my packages without tipping them off. While setting it up, I tried to calm myself down. Maybe it wasn't Karen. Maybe it was just someone else in the neighborhood. But the truth was, I had seen enough suspicious behavior over the past few weeks to know that the thief wasn't some random stranger. It was someone who knew the neighborhood, someone who knew the schedule of package deliveries, someone who had a strange obsession with everyone else's property. And the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that Karen was behind it all. After the camera was in place, I started to wait. I watched through the little screen in my living room, sipping coffee, pretending to do work, all while my heart raced every time a shadow passed by my porch. Each delivery day became a tense game of cat and mouse. I couldn't help but imagine all the scenarios. Maybe Karen would just glance at the package and leave it. Maybe she would take it and act completely innocent. Maybe she would slip it into her oversized tote bag and stroll away without a second thought. And then, as if on cue, there she was, walking slowly down the street, looking casual but just a little too deliberate. Her eyes locked on the package, her stride slowed. She glanced around, almost like she was making sure nobody was watching. My hands went clammy. I held my breath. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but deep down, I knew this was it. This was the moment that would tell me once and for all whether Karen was the culprit behind my missing packages. I leaned closer to the camera screen, heart pounding, every muscle tense. And then she stopped, right in front of my porch. My stomach flipped. This was it. Something was about to happen. And whether I liked it or not, my peaceful neighborhood life had officially ended. I watched the camera feed like a hawk, every twitch, every movement amplified in my mind. Karen didn't just casually walk by the street anymore, she had a presence. A sense of control like she owned the whole neighborhood. And maybe, in her own mind, she did. There she was again, walking past my porch as if she belonged there, the sun glinting off her perfectly ironed blouse. But it wasn't just her appearance that set off alarms. It was the way she looked at the package, the slow, calculating way her eyes scanned the surroundings. She glanced to the left, then right, and finally down at the box. There was a pause, a hesitation, and then that little nod. That nod I hated, the one that said, "I know something you don't." At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just nosy. Maybe she was a busybody who liked to keep an eye on everyone's deliveries. That's what I told myself to keep from losing my mind. But the truth kept gnawing at me. No one else acted like this. No one else seemed to have an unhealthy fascination with my porch. And every time a package disappeared, she conveniently happened to be nearby. My gut told me this wasn't coincidence. The more I watched, the more I noticed her patterns. Karen had a strange rhythm. On package delivery days, she would take long walks in the neighborhood, seemingly aimless, but always ending up within a few feet of my house at some point. On days without deliveries, she was nowhere to be seen. And then there was the way she interacted with neighbors, smiling, chatting, making it all seem innocent, the perfect picture of a helpful HOA president. But it didn't take a detective to notice that her perfect smiles always came with just a hint of calculation, like a chess player plotting moves 10 steps ahead. I started keeping a log of her movements, scribbling times and dates, and even sketching out where she would stand on the street. It was starting to feel like I was running a private investigation in my own neighborhood. Some part of me felt ridiculous. Who spends hours tracking the HOA president, but the bigger part of me wanted answers. And I had a feeling that, when the truth came out, I'd feel vindicated and a little triumphant. It wasn't long before I had enough information to make a plan. I needed proof. Real proof, something undeniable. I couldn't just accuse Karen based on patterns and suspicious glances. That would backfire spectacularly, and I knew it. She was the type who could turn even the most obvious confrontation around and make it seem like I was the crazy one. I needed a way to catch her in the act, something that would leave no room for doubt. That's when the idea hit me, a decoy. I'd order a package that was impossible to resist, something obvious and valuable, but completely fake inside. I'd place it right in the middle of my porch where anyone passing by would see it, and I'd let her make the first move. To make it even better, I could record the whole thing. Hidden cameras, strategically placed, would capture every angle, every expression, every second of her inevitable blunder. I spent the next few days planning it like a heist movie. I mapped out the porch, picked the perfect spot for the decoy, and even rehearsed my reactions in case she saw me. I knew Karen's type. She would act casual, maybe even walk away if she thought she was being watched. But deep down, I knew curiosity and greed would get the better of her. And when it did, I'd have the proof I needed to finally put an end to the mystery of the disappearing packages. Even though I was setting up a plan, I couldn't stop obsessing over her behavior. Every time she walked past, every time she smiled at me across the street, my mind raced with theories. Was she aware she was being watched? Did she have some justification in her own mind for taking packages? And most importantly, would she fall for the decoy? The days stretched on like a slow, suspenseful movie. My porch became a stage, the package my prop, and Karen the unsuspecting star. Every shadow, every movement caught on camera made my heart race. The quiet neighborhood I once loved now felt like a battlefield, and I was determined to win. I knew one thing for sure: patience would be key. One wrong move and the whole plan could fall apart. And so I waited, with a mix of dread and anticipation, knowing that the next package delivery could change everything. I was ready for the moment when Karen would finally show her true colors, and I'd be ready to catch her red-handed. The morning my latest package arrived, I could barely contain myself. I kept glancing at the porch camera feed, pretending to scroll on my phone while secretly watching every movement outside. My heart was racing in a way I hadn't felt since, well, maybe the time I tried skydiving and realized gravity was not my friend. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. This was personal. My packages had been disappearing for weeks, and I was determined to finally find out who was behind it. I saw Karen again, strolling down the street, her steps slow and deliberate. She didn't just walk by. No, she moved with purpose. Her eyes flicked toward my porch, then around the neighborhood, as if checking that no one else was paying attention. And there it was, that little nod, the one that had become the symbol of my frustration. I clenched my fists, silently willing her to make a mistake, to take the package and reveal herself. And then she did. Karen reached my porch and paused, one hand hovering over the box like she was performing some kind of delicate ritual. She glanced to the left, then to the right, and finally bent down to pick it up. The camera captured everything. I could see her eyes flicker with satisfaction as she tucked the package under her arm, her posture just casual enough to pretend nothing had happened. My stomach flipped. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was the thief, and the proof was staring back at me in crystal-clear footage. I leaned back in my chair, laughing nervously at the absurdity of it all. Me, a regular person, sitting in my living room like a secret agent, catching the HOA president stealing my packages. It felt like a scene from a sitcom, except the stakes were oddly personal. I could almost hear the laugh track in my head every time Karen strutted away, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just been caught red-handed. But at the same time, I couldn't help the anger simmering inside me. Weeks of frustration, of lost deliveries, of wondering if my next package would disappear, all pointed directly at her. She had violated the trust of the neighborhood, and she had done it with that infuriating confidence that made you want to scream. Yet, as much as I wanted to confront her right then and there, I knew it would be a mistake. Karen was smart, manipulative, and utterly capable of twisting the situation to make me look bad. I had to be patient. I had to plan my next move carefully. Over the next few days, I reviewed the footage repeatedly, noticing every little detail I had missed the first time. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the subtle glance around her shoulder, the slight smirk that betrayed a sense of accomplishment. It was like watching a villain monologue in slow motion, except in this case, the villain lived next door and was obsessed with taking my packages. I started to document everything, creating a little file with timestamps, descriptions, and even notes on her body language. If this ever went to the HOA board, or if I needed evidence to confront her, I wanted every angle covered. I also started imagining what it would be like to confront her. Not angrily, not emotionally, but calmly, like a detective presenting undeniable evidence. I could see her face in my mind, shocked, flustered, scrambling for an excuse. Maybe she would say it was all a misunderstanding, that she had thought the packages were community property or something equally ridiculous. I could almost hear her stammering, fumbling over words, while I stood there holding the proof. But I knew I couldn't rush it. Patience was key. Rushing would ruin everything. That's when I decided I needed to up my game. The next package would be a decoy. Something that would tempt her beyond reason, something impossible to resist, and most importantly, something that would make the moment of exposure undeniable. This wasn't just about catching her in the act, it was about teaching her a lesson she wouldn't forget. And so, I started preparing. I researched what kinds of items would seem valuable enough to lure her in, how to place the package for maximum visibility, and where to hide the camera so she wouldn't suspect a thing. Every detail mattered. Every move had to be calculated. Weeks of stolen packages had led me here, and I was not about to let this go unnoticed. As I went through the preparations, a strange mixture of excitement and dread settled over me. I couldn't stop thinking about the moment she would arrive, the moment the decoy would work, and the moment I would finally have the proof I needed to end the mystery once and for all. The quiet, peaceful neighborhood I had once loved had become a stage for this suspenseful game, and I was determined to see it through. Little did I know, the next delivery day would be the day that changed everything. I knew I couldn't leave things to chance anymore. Karen had been bold, methodical, and annoyingly clever in how she went about taking my packages. It wasn't enough to just watch her anymore. I had to take control, and that meant setting a trap so perfect that even she couldn't resist it. The idea hit me one late night while scrolling through my phone. If she couldn't resist a shiny new package, why not make the next one irresistible? I would order something that looked valuable, something that screamed, "Take me now." But inside it would be completely harmless. Maybe a bag of glitter, a cheap gadget, or some utterly useless trinket. The goal wasn't the content, it was the reaction. I wanted to see her in the act, caught on camera, with no way to wriggle out. I began planning it like a mission in one of those spy movies I like to binge. I mapped out my porch, noting the best angles for the hidden cameras. One tucked behind a flower pot, another disguised in a small decorative item. I even measured the lines of sight so that every inch of the porch was covered. It was meticulous, borderline obsessive, but at this point, I didn't care. Weeks of stolen packages had pushed me into full-on detective mode. Choosing the right decoy was harder than I expected. I needed something obvious, something that would tempt even a person who usually pretended to have impeccable self-control. I debated various options: a limited edition figurine, a small electronics box with flashy stickers, even a gift basket filled with tiny, glittering items. In the end, I settled on a small package that looked expensive and enticing, but inside contained nothing of value, just some bubble wrap and a fake golden trinket. The moment she touched it, I wanted her caught in the act, her expression priceless. I placed the decoy carefully on my porch in the late afternoon. The golden glow of the setting sun made it look even more appealing, almost like it was waiting for her specifically. I stepped back, wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans, and made sure the cameras were recording from every angle. This was it. My plan had been months in the making, and now it was ready to unfold. The waiting began. I couldn't just sit idly, it would drive me crazy. I paced around my living room, checking the camera feeds every few seconds, making mental notes about Karen's usual timing. She was predictable, almost annoyingly so. She had her routine down perfectly: walk past the houses, check the mailboxes, glance at porches, and always somehow make it look like nothing was unusual. But this time, I had set the stage, and I was ready to watch it all unfold. Hours passed. I told myself I would remain calm, but every rustle outside made my heart leap. Was that a neighbor walking by or her coming closer? My mind raced with scenarios. Maybe she would see the cameras and pretend not to notice. Maybe she would hesitate. Maybe she would take it and act completely innocent afterward. But deep down, I knew curiosity and greed would win. Karen was too nosy, too controlling, and far too obsessed with appearances to resist the temptation. Finally, I saw her, walking down the street just as I had predicted. She paused at the corner, glanced both ways, and then made a beeline for my porch. Every step she took felt slow and deliberate, like she was rehearsing the act in her mind. My palms were clammy, and I had to remind myself to breathe. This was it, the moment of truth. As she reached the porch, she looked around cautiously, then down at the package. Her expression changed subtly, a flicker of anticipation in her eyes. My camera captured it all. I leaned closer to the monitor, holding my breath. Every second felt like an eternity. I imagined the look on her face when she realized she had been caught, and a small part of me couldn't help but laugh at the thought. I knew this plan wouldn't just give me satisfaction, it would give me closure. Weeks of frustration, anxiety, and paranoia were about to pay off. Karen had no idea what was coming, and that made the moment even. The decoy wasn't just a package. It was justice wrapped up in brown cardboard. And I waited. I crouched behind the hedge at the edge of my yard, pretending to read a book while my eyes were glued to the porch camera feed. Every leaf that rustled, every shadow that shifted, made my heart leap. I felt like a spy in a low-budget thriller, except the only thing at stake was a cardboard box and my dignity. Still, the tension was real. Weeks of stolen packages had led me here, and I wasn't about to let Karen get the better of me this time. Time seemed to stretch. I sipped my coffee, trying to act casual though my hands were shaking slightly. I checked the camera again, nothing. Then, just when I was beginning to doubt if she would even show up, I saw her. Karen, in her signature perfectly ironed blouse and primped hair, appeared at the end of the street. Her eyes were immediately drawn to the porch, and I felt that familiar sinking feeling in my stomach. She knew, or maybe she didn't, but that didn't matter. The decoy had worked. She walked slowly, deliberately, as if trying to convince herself she wasn't doing anything wrong. But I could see the anticipation building on her face. She paused just outside my gate, glanced to the left, then to the right, making sure nobody was watching. My pulse quickened. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Weeks of planning, of obsessively monitoring her patterns, had led to this exact second. She stepped onto the porch and leaned slightly over the package. I could almost hear her inner monologue. "It looks so valuable, just sitting here, maybe no one will notice if I take it." Her hand hovered above the box, trembling ever so slightly, and I suppressed a laugh. This was better than I had imagined. For a moment, she just stared at it. Then she slowly lifted the package, glancing around again, as if expecting a hidden camera to pop out and yell, "Gotcha!" I bit my lip, barely able to contain my excitement. The camera feed showed everything, every glance, every hesitation, every subtle smirk that betrayed her satisfaction. She didn't even realize she was being recorded from multiple angles. I held my breath as she tucked the package under her arm and straightened up. My stomach flipped. This was it, the red-handed moment. All the frustration of missing deliveries, all the paranoia, all the mental debates about whether I was overreacting, culminated in this single action. She had taken the decoy, and I had the proof. Yet even as satisfaction coursed through me, there was a flicker of hesitation. I knew I had to stay calm. If I ran outside yelling or waved my arms like a maniac, she could claim harassment or make a scene. I had to let the footage speak for itself. Patience was still my best weapon. I could almost hear the suspenseful music playing in my head, the kind they use in crime shows right before the reveal. Karen lingered for a moment, glancing around as if she felt something was off, then started walking back toward the street. My camera followed her every step. The decoy had worked flawlessly. Every motion she made, every glance was documented for posterity. I imagined showing it to the neighbors or even the HOA board, watching them gasp in disbelief as Karen, the ever-perfect HOA president, had been caught red-handed. I stayed crouched behind the hedge for a few more minutes, making sure she had left the immediate area before I exhaled. The tension in my body melted slowly, replaced by a mixture of triumph and relief. The game was far from over, but this was the crucial first victory. Weeks of frustration, uncertainty, and subtle paranoia had finally led to tangible results. I sat back in my chair, trying to steady my breathing while mentally preparing for the next phase. The decoy had succeeded. The evidence was there. The question now was what I would do with it. Confront her directly, take it to the HOA, or simply enjoy the satisfaction of knowing the truth and wait for the perfect moment to strike. Whatever I chose, one thing was clear. Karen had been caught. The quiet, peaceful neighborhood I had once taken for granted had become a stage for this suspenseful game, and I was finally in control. The next package delivery wouldn't be the same, and neither would Karen. The next morning, I reviewed the camera footage again, almost afraid to believe what I had captured. But there it was, undeniable and crystal clear. Karen, my perfectly polished, HOA-obsessed neighbor, had taken the decoy package right off my porch. Every movement, every glance, every little smirk of satisfaction was captured on camera. My heart pounded as I watched it, a mixture of triumph and disbelief washing over me. After weeks of frustration, paranoia, and missing deliveries, I finally had proof. I sat back in my chair, trying to process it all. I could hardly believe how bold she had been. I had half expected her to hesitate, maybe notice the cameras, maybe leave the package behind. But no. Karen had walked up, glanced around like a seasoned thief, and tucked it under her arm with the kind of confidence that could only come from someone used to getting away with things. My camera had captured it perfectly from multiple angles, and the footage was impossible to deny. I couldn't stop thinking about how I would use this. Confronting her directly might be satisfying, but I knew her type. Karen could twist any confrontation into a story where I looked like the crazy neighbor, the one obsessed with packages and paranoia. I needed a plan, a way to expose her that left no room for excuses or denials. And I had it, the footage. I watched her movements again, frame by frame. The little way she glanced around before picking up the package, the slight smirk that betrayed her satisfaction, the way she walked back down the street as if nothing had happened. It was almost comical, like a scene from a low-budget detective show, except this wasn't fiction. This was my life, my packages, my neighborhood, and now, finally, my evidence. I realized just how much patience it had taken to get here. Weeks of planning, observing, and waiting had led to this moment. The decoy had worked perfectly. I could almost hear the suspenseful music in my head, the kind that plays in crime dramas right before the big reveal. And the best part? Karen had no idea. She walked away, oblivious to the fact that her actions were recorded for posterity. Even as relief washed over me, I couldn't ignore the nervous excitement bubbling inside. What would I do next? Show the footage to the HOA, use it to confront her directly, or just let it sit, a little secret I could revisit whenever she gave me that smug HOA nod. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more satisfying than the last. I could almost imagine the look on her face when everyone finally saw the proof: shock, embarrassment, maybe even anger. I knew one thing for certain. I had won the first round. Weeks of stolen packages, sleepless nights worrying about who was taking them, and endless frustration had finally culminated in a tangible victory. The decoy had worked, the evidence was solid, and Karen's carefully cultivated image of the perfect HOA president was starting to crack. But there was still more to come. The real challenge wasn't just catching her, it was deciding how to handle it. I wanted justice, yes, but I also wanted satisfaction. I wanted Karen to realize that her little games had consequences, that sneaking around and taking what wasn't hers wouldn't go unnoticed forever. And now, I had the perfect tool to make that happen. I watched the footage one last time, letting the moment sink in. Every frame was a reminder that patience and planning could beat even the boldest thief. Karen had been caught red-handed, and there was nothing she could do to deny it. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. My packages were safe for now, and the neighborhood, quiet as it was, had become a stage for this little drama that I had finally started to control. The next step was obvious: the confrontation. But not just any confrontation. This one would be methodical, undeniable, and completely satisfying. Karen wouldn't get a chance to twist the story in her favor this time. I had the proof, I had the plan, and I was ready. The quiet, perfect neighborhood I had once loved was about to witness a spectacle that no one would forget. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and I could feel my stomach twisting with anticipation. Weeks of stolen packages, paranoia, and planning had led to this moment. Karen had no idea what was coming, and I intended to make sure she knew she couldn't get away with it. I carried the footage with me, stored safely on my laptop, ready to show the entire board, and the rest of the neighborhood, exactly what she had done. As I walked into the meeting room, I could feel eyes on me, some curious, some suspicious. Karen was already there, seated at the front like she owned the place, perfectly composed, perfectly polished. Her smile was sharp, almost predatory, and I had to fight the urge to roll my eyes. She had no clue, not yet. The meeting started with the usual formalities: budget reports, landscaping discussions, the usual HOA bureaucracy. My hands were trembling slightly as I waited for my moment. Every second felt like an eternity, the tension building with each passing word. Finally, the chairperson asked if anyone had anything to bring up. This was it. My heart raced as I stood, cleared my throat, and made my way to the front of the room. I started calmly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through me. I'd like to address an ongoing issue that has affected multiple residents, including myself, I said, keeping my tone neutral but firm. For weeks, packages have been disappearing from my porch. I've documented the events, and I have clear evidence of what has been happening. All eyes turned toward Karen. I could see her face tighten slightly, that confident smile faltering ever so slightly. She tilted her head, pretending curiosity, but I knew she was nervous. The perfect image of the HOA president was starting to crack. I connected my laptop to the projector and hit play. The footage rolled, capturing Karen walking down the street, glancing around, and finally picking up my decoy package. The room went silent, all eyes glued to the screen. Karen's carefully curated slipped as she realized she was exposed. Her hand went to her mouth, eyes wide, and for a brief moment, she looked genuinely panicked. The footage continued, showing her walking away with the package, completely unaware of the cameras that had recorded her every move. My voice remained calm as I narrated quietly, explaining what had happened and pointing out the repeated patterns over the past weeks. This isn't a misunderstanding, I said. This is a deliberate action. The evidence is clear and indisputable. I could feel the room shift. Whispers started spreading among the neighbors, a mixture of disbelief and amusement. Karen tried to speak, but her words faltered. I can explain, she began, but her excuses sounded hollow, weak against the concrete evidence displayed on the screen. I remained silent, letting the footage speak for itself. By the time the video ended, Karen was visibly flustered. The board members exchanged glances, murmuring among themselves, and I felt a surge of vindication. Weeks of stolen packages, anxiety, and frustration had culminated in this moment. I had planned carefully, acted patiently, and finally had justice. Karen's attempts to recover her composure were pitiful. She sputtered, tried to justify herself with some vague talk about neighborhood rules and community sharing, but it was meaningless. The evidence was irrefutable, and everyone in the room could see it. For once, she had no power, no control over the narrative. She had been caught, and there was nothing she could do to twist the story in her favor. I finished by calmly stating that I hoped this would serve as a reminder that actions have consequences, even in the seemingly quiet, peaceful world of the HOA. The tension in the room was palpable, but it wasn't uncomfortable, it was satisfying. Karen's reign as the untouchable, self-righteous HOA queen had been interrupted, and the neighborhood had witnessed it firsthand. As I walked back to my seat, I could feel the subtle nods of approval from neighbors, the quiet smiles of those who had long suspected Karen's antics. The sense of relief and triumph was overwhelming. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control, and I knew that, from this point forward, my packages would remain untouched. And just like that, the showdown was over. Karen sat there, flustered and speechless, while I basked in the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served, quietly, cleverly, and undeniably. After the meeting, the neighborhood felt different, lighter somehow, like a storm had passed. Karen didn't speak to me for days, and honestly, I wasn't surprised. Her perfect, self-righteous had cracked, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out how to recover her dignity. Meanwhile, I finally felt a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in weeks. My packages were safe, my patience had paid off, and justice had been served. In the days that followed, the whispers started. Neighbors would catch my eye and smirk or give a subtle nod of approval when Karen walked by. Some of them had clearly suspected her all along, but now the evidence was undeniable. I couldn't help but chuckle at the thought of Karen packing her perfectly manicured lawn, muttering about how could this happen. She had been exposed, not by confrontation or yelling, but by patience, planning, and a well-timed decoy. Life slowly returned to normal, at least as normal as life could be in a neighborhood with an overbearing HOA president. Packages were delivered, retrieved, and placed safely inside my house without incident. I found myself enjoying the simple pleasures again, sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching kids ride their bikes, waving at neighbors without the constant paranoia of someone lurking around to steal my mail. Of course, Karen didn't take her defeat gracefully. I could still catch glimpses of her glaring from across the street, eyes narrowed as if silently plotting revenge, but it didn't bother me. I had learned something valuable from the experience. Sometimes, the best way to handle a problem isn't to confront it immediately with anger, but to wait, observe, and plan. Let the truth speak for itself. Let the evidence do the work. And in the end, the results speak louder than any argument or confrontation ever could. I even started joking about the situation with a few neighbors. "You know," I said with a grin, "Karen finally found a package she couldn't take my patience." The laughter that followed was the best kind of therapy, a reminder that while HOA politics could be ridiculous, a little cleverness and a good sense of humor could go a long way. Looking back, I realized that this whole ordeal had changed me. I wasn't just the person who sat at home and watched their packages disappear anymore. I was a strategist, a planner, someone who could outwit even the most meticulous of neighbors. And while I hoped I'd never need to use my skills again, I knew that if Karen, or anyone like her, ever tried something similar, I would be ready. The decoy package became almost legendary in my own mind, a symbol of victory and patience rewarded. I kept the footage tucked safely away, not as a threat, but as a reminder that justice had been served. Every time I thought of Karen and her smug little smile, I couldn't help but laugh. She had underestimated me, and that mistake had cost her more than just a few stolen packages. It had cost her credibility and her image of untouchable authority in the neighborhood. In the end, life returned to the peaceful routine I had always wanted, but with a twist. I felt more confident, more empowered, and maybe just a little mischievous. After all, catching an overbearing HOA president red-handed wasn't something that happened every day. It was a story I would remember, laugh about, and share in small doses with neighbors who appreciated the humor in it all. So whenever a package arrives on my porch now, I pick it up with a smile, knowing I've earned the right to enjoy it. Karen might still be watching, but now I know I'm the one in control. And sometimes, that's all you need to feel victorious in a neighborhood full of rules, regulations, and self-proclaimed authorities. Justice had been served, patience had been rewarded, and peace, sweet, package-safe peace, was finally restored. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.